Hi everyone. This week, our first week of class, we are just going to orient ourselves to the ideas of global health. What is this course going to be about? How do we think about this in sort of the broad perspective of health, public health, and the bigger sort of picture. So in the slides, I have a nice little chart that talks about sort of the difference between global health, international health, and public health. Public health, as we know, is the bigger picture sort of study of health, whereas international health was the older sort of perspective of looking at health from a binational sort of perspective, looking at, the country of origin of where you are versus others, whereas global health looks at the health of the entire world. And we're going to talk about how this is both challenging and important to look at it from multiple sort of perspectives. Although this is a public health class, I will be drawing on stuff such as politics and looking at other sort of social sciences as they work together, because the reality is health is not absent from all of these different sort of things. And so we'll be talking about it from a very broad perspective, including us in the global health perspective, as well as talking about sort of how other countries and other peoples look at different sort of health perspectives. And so what students often find in this class is that health is much bigger than what they thought it was, and that there are a lot more things that are included under sort of the umbrella of global health than typically what we think of in public health. For this week, I would like for you to fill out the little quiz that I have on there. This is an informal quiz. It's not for any sort of points, but more so it's just to look collectively at what we know about the world and what are some of the assumptions that we make about the world in terms of health and our ideas about different sort of locations in the world. So right now, I would like you to open up the quiz that I have posted on Canvas. That is the global sort of knowledge quiz. Take that out and look on it. It's all based off of information from Gapminder. Gapminder is a really great source, particularly for international and global health issues, because it looks at data and data sets, and it's a repository of information that comes from all over the place from long periods of time. You can look at a lot of different public health information that has been tracked locally, globally, and historically over time. And so the questions in here are just some very general ones, not ones I would expect you to know, but ones that we will talk about a little bit in terms of how we understand the world and what we think of as health. So the first question is, in which country of these three currently has the lowest death rate during the first year of life? The first year of life is the most important year of life when we term and in terms of looking at childhood health. So infant mortality is how many kids die before their first birthday. We know that for high infant mortality rate, that generally is an indicator that the country has a lot of things going on, both in terms of maternal and child health, but also just in terms of structural health and sort of public health things. So your choices are Singapore, which is in Southeast Asia, Sweden, which is in Northern Europe, and Venezuela, which is on the northern coast of South America. Guess which one you think it is, and then think about why did you think that. Generally, when I'm doing in class, we actually do it as an activity together, but since we're online, it's a little bit different. So why did you choose that country? What did you think about that? Generally speaking, most people think of Sweden because they think of sort of the Nordic countries as having some of the best public health infrastructure sort of issues, and not really knowing much about the other sort of countries. The correct answer for this one is Singapore. Well, why? Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, Singapore, although it is in Southeast Asia, is one of the most developed nation states in the world. High technology, high amount of per capita income, and also it benefits from being a city nation state. It is a city, but it's also a country. Generally, the smaller and more homogenous of a country, the better it is at having good health statistics. And so Singapore is an outlier in terms of Asia, both all of Asia and Southeast Asia, and it actually has better infant mortality rates than Sweden. Okay, question 2, which country of these three has the lowest infant mortality rates? Nicaragua, which is in Central America, Sri Lanka, which is in South Asia, or Turkey, which is on the bridge between Europe and Asia. Oftentimes people don't have a lot of perspectives about these three countries because they're lesser known. They're not some of the big sort of major players in the global thing. And so oftentimes when people are looking at this, we often think in a very European-centric sort of idea about the health of Europe. But again, this question is sort of a trick question. The answer is Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is an island state off of the coast of India that has had some big political revolution, but they've also done some really good public health interventions in their time. Again, being an island nation, they get protected from some of the disease vectors and other sort of things that go across boundaries because they are physically isolated in terms of an island. So combined with their good public health sort of practices, they actually do have some pretty good infant mortality rates. Okay. Third question, in which country is the highest average income per person today? We'll talk a lot more about money and income, but generally speaking, we know that health and wealth go together. And so the higher income that a person has, the more likely it is that they're going to be healthy, because we know that health is a function of wealth. And so your question or your answers for this are Botswana, which is in Southern Africa, Egypt, which is in the northeast corner of Africa, southwest sort of Asia, or Moldova, which is Eastern European. Again, a lot of countries that people don't know a lot about. We associate Egypt maybe with the pyramids and some other sort of stuff. Most people have either never heard of Moldova or know very little about it. And Botswana, again, most people are just like, it's Africa, I don't know. And so oftentimes people will venture guesses kind of all over the place. Again, surprisingly, the answer to this question is Botswana. What? Africa to have a high per capita income? Yes, actually they do. Botswana is what we often call sort of the jewel or the outlier of Africa. Botswana is very, very wealthy in diamonds. Most of the world's diamond resources come from Botswana. And Botswana is different from a lot of African countries because they have a pretty stable democratic government. And so they have done a good job in comparison to a lot of places of not having a corrupt government and actually giving the wealth of the nation back to the people. And so it's an important thing to know. Oftentimes when we think of Africa, we have this idea that Africa is poor and terrible and all these really bad things sort of happening. But that is just a general sort of stereotype. And we have to remember that there's going to be outliers in every different sort of place. And Botswana is one of those. Okay, in which country do people live the longest on average today? Again, we have our same three, Botswana, Egypt, and Moldova. Now that we've answered sort of the question of where is the health and wealth in terms of per capita income, a lot of people would guess Botswana, right? Which would be a really, really good guess. However, you're wrong because I intentionally set up this quiz to be hard. In actuality, the people who live the longest of these three are in Moldova. So again, we have to say that sometimes our general sort of stereotypes and our correlations don't always match up. Botswana did have a very big or a very long life expectancy until the HIV epidemic. The HIV epidemic has decimated the world, but particularly across Africa. We saw the life expectancy for most African nations fall by about 50% because of the HIV/AIDS crisis, and that is true in Botswana. So in this case, yes, they do have a lot of per capita wealth and income, but they also have the HIV epidemic, and so that has significantly impacted their life expectancy. Moldova is a former Eastern Bloc part of the USSR. They have done a lot of reconstruction and building since the fall of the USSR and have been able to pull themselves out of some poverty, although they still pale in a lot of comparison to a lot of different parts of Europe. The next question 5, in which country today do women on average marry at the oldest age? Again, you might ask, why does this matter? Well, one of the things that we do know, again, in generalities, is that the more independent women are and the more educated that women are, the more likely a country is to have better health outcomes. And so oftentimes when we look at measures of countries' health or other sort of public health factors, we look at what is the status of women in a country. Women who tend to get married older means they tend to have children later. It means that they tend to have less children, much more likely to have education. And so that is one of the reasons why we look at age of marriage in women as a health indicator. So the answers are Algeria, which is in Northern Africa, Canada, which is in North America, or the Philippines, which is in Southeast Asia. Now, again, most people have an assumption, which is not totally incorrect, that we are very sort of European-centric, very US-centric. And so we're like, well, Canada's kind of like us. And so we would guess Canada. A good guess, but also, again, wrong. Algeria is actually the country where women get married at the oldest age. What? That's a North African Muslim country. That seems weird. Well, that's true, but also in Algeria is a matrilineal society. And so in Algeria, the property and the wealth of families passes through women. And so what we know is that when women are in control of property and money, well, we treat them differently, right? They're no longer part of the property. They are in charge of everything. And so part of that is to say, yeah, we don't want to marry off our women very young. We want them to be educated. We want them to be in charge of their lives. We want them to do a lot of different sort of things because that is where all the concentration of the wealth of the family is. And so, again, our assumptions and our ideas about Muslim countries or about African countries oftentimes hold true, but in some cases, like in Algeria, they actually don't. Okay, question 6, which country has the fewest number of children per woman? Again, as I just said, the number of children per woman is oftentimes used as a proxy for a health indicator because we know that women who have lots and lots of children oftentimes have bigger health issues. And we know that large families are often a product of lack of family planning and other sort of things. So your answers are Tunisia, which is Northern Africa, Bangladesh, which is South Asia, or Argentina, which is Southeastern South America. A lot of people have no idea about many of these countries, and so it's oftentimes a random guess. Tunisia is the correct answer. Tunisia is right next to Algeria. Based off of what you just learned about Algeria, you can also gather some of the same sort of things there are true about Tunisia. Lots of matrilineal sort of societies and other sort of things. And so women are much more educated, despite them being both Muslim and North African. They defy the stereotypes that we typically associate with those two different countries. Okay, question 7. Which country emits the most tons of CO2, carbon dioxide, per person today? China, which is in East Asia, France, which is in Western Europe, or the USA, which is in North America. Now, if you've ever paid attention to any sort of news or other sort of things, you've probably heard a lot about China being one of the most polluted countries on earth. This is true, but what also you should realize is that China has way more people than anywhere else. And so actually the United States, we're the worst at producing carbon dioxide. We have a lot of cars, we have a lot of industry, we have a whole bunch of stuff. And so per capita, meaning per person, we produce far and away more pollution than any other nation on the world. If we looked at sort of total carbon emissions, yes, China does top the list, but because of their per person capability, the per capita, the United States, we are the most carbon dioxide producing people in the entire world. And so again, having to change sort of some of our assumptions about the things that we know. So again, this quiz was not to make you feel bad or ignorant or other sort of things, but in general to just talk about what do we know and how do we know about things in the world. It's a pretty natural thing that we don't know a lot about the rest of the world. We know what's in our world and we kind of make assumptions based on that. And so the video for this week that I want you to watch is about global ignorance. It's from the founders of Gapminder, so Hans and Ola Rosling, who are two nerdy Swedish guys who do a lot of data analysis, but they also have been pushing to the forefront about looking at sort of global health statistics and how do we manage these sort of things. So I'd like you to watch that video. Think about what is brought up in the video. How does this change your sort of perspectives? And how do you think you'll use this information moving forward in the course? I really chose this video as sort of a grounding video for the first week in order to sort of set the tone for the rest of the course. course. So for this week, I want you to watch that video, and then for this week's activity, I just want you to introduce yourself, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you hope to gain from this class. Please look at the policy paper instructions before next week and start thinking about health issues and things that you want to explore for the rest of the semester. All right, see you then. Bye.